all the precip. So we're going to talk a little bit about where we've come from over the past year, how these recent precip conditions might actually help. And I think they are helping, but we're not quite out of the woods yet. And then what the rest of the spring looks like. Okay, so this first slide here has the US Drought Monitor map on it. And this is the map from last week. The new map is going to come out tomorrow. And I expect to see some changes across, especially Arizona with the recent precipitation. But this really kind of sums up the story. And I think it's done a good job of sort of capturing the evolution of drought here over the last year. And we'll kind of walk through that. But right now, most of Arizona is actually an exceptional drought. An exceptional drought is the drought that it's the worst category of drought on the Drought Monitor, and it's a drought that you should see once every 50 years or twice a century. So for us to bottom out this deeply, we haven't actually seen this extent of D4 drought across Arizona at this extent since the Drought Monitor started in 2000, in the year 2000. So we're kind of in uncharted territory, and the way we got there was quite unique, and especially in the last 25 years. If we look, next slide here is going to be the evolution of the drought. So it's maybe a little hard to remember, but just a year ago, the January 21st, 2020 Drought Monitor map had much of Arizona proper drought-free, but you can still see the upper basin of the Colorado River Basin was in moderate to severe drought. So thinking back over the last couple of years, and especially last winter, the upper basin did not see spectacular snowfall and precipitation, and then actually kind of lost it as time went on, as conditions warmed up. But the southern part of the state actually did quite well, and kind of from central Arizona south, and especially into southwest Arizona, the Yuma area, ended up having above average precipitation last winter. So January of last year, we were doing pretty good. The upper right panel there is going to be all the way to June. So even through the spring, still kind of holding steady. Upper basin still sort of really struggling with those lingering and worsening drought conditions. And then by the time we get through the summer season, that's when things had really bottomed out. So we ended up having record dry conditions for Arizona and record hot conditions for Arizona as the monsoon failed. And I think we all remember how miserable that was. And so missing out almost completely on that summer precipitation put us into the current drought conditions. And so by last week's map, January 19th, you can see in the bottom right, that is also adding on the dry conditions, not only that kind of ended in September, but continued on in October, November, and December. Those months were also below average. And also, if you remember, quite warm. October and November were quite warm. And we've actually kind of stabilized a little bit, and temperatures have moderated, especially in December and this part of January so far. So the last 12 months, this would be January through December. This is some gridded data across the region here. And you can see that almost all of the region was in the bottom 10 percentile of precipitations. That's the whole 120-year record that we're drawing from here. So dry across the region. You can see southwest Arizona was near normal to above normal. Again, not much precip falls there normally, and so it doesn't take much to put it above, but it was quite wet last winter. And then temperatures over the previous calendar year, January through December, were very warm, and they were record warm or in the top 10% of all the historical records. You can really see that centered on Arizona. And much of this this record-setting heat actually kind of fell from April through October. And so that was when we really saw the temperatures really skyrocketing up and has really dragged up the annual temperature. So we're gonna kind of zoom forward here and just look at the last 3 months. So how is the sort of late fall winter season looked? Well, it's continued and it's been pretty dry. So this is October through December. Again, just in the last 3 months, we're in the bottom 10%. So if you can remember back, we had very little measurable precip in October. We had a little bit in November and then just a little bit in December. So this is not counting the precip we had in just the last week for the whole winter season. So overall, we're really still struggling with precipitation. And then as far as temperatures, it was quite warm, and it was especially warm in the low deserts. And that was really that October-November period that really dragged up these temperature rankings. So I pulled some data here. And again, you're really going to want to consult the ASMET data for the sort of local heat units. But this is a gridded data set from the Climate Toolbox. And you can look at gridded growing degree units. So I just pulled, this has got a base temperature of 40, and it's since October 1st. So both of these maps show above average heat units through a couple days ago, and obviously it's going to push to, it's going to make things earlier on their anomalies as well. And this again really is from having this October 1st start date and having all that warmth sort of earlier in the fall and winter season. And I think that's really slowed down, especially over the last 30 days. This is a climate summary plot that I produced, and so I've been tracking some of the station data, and so this is just for Phoenix. I've got them for all over the state, and it really just shows you down here, the cumulative total precipitation is very, very much lacking. This will improve as we see some of the precipitation totals come in over the last couple of days, but it does show you that, at least as of a couple days ago, we're about 1.5 inches below average with just 4 precip events since October 1st. But I kind of wanted to show you that that bottom panel has got the daily average temperatures. And you can see when the bars stick way above that red line is really where those very warm days were occurring in October, November, a little bit in December, but really kind of evened out. And we've been really kind of hugging a little bit closer to average over the last 30 days. So I think that that moderation in temperature has certainly been a little bit helpful. But then if we start to look at the last 90 days, and I'm now trying to grab some data that actually has this most recent precipitation event to really sort of evaluate how are our precip anomalies sort of improving and how much are they improving and across the whole Colorado River Basin. And so this really was an impressive precipitation event and just the kind that you want for Arizona, especially if you're going to try to build snowpack. This was a very cold storm, very low snow levels, put down a lot of snow at the upper elevations. And so this was really beneficial. But even with this one event, and it was really 3 events if you total them up through last week, this lower right panel here is the precipitation, percent of normal precipitation for the last 90 days. And this is up through January 27th. So you can see a couple of areas that are, if they're getting into that gray to green area, they're almost approaching the totals that you'd need to be average over that November through end of January period. And so there's just very few areas across the Southwest, even with this precipitation event. So most areas are still 75% of average or even 50% of average. So missing that November and December precip has really put us behind. And that's not even including just the 12-month total here with missing all of that summer precip. So we're really still very much lagging, and we're going to need quite a bit more precip if we're going to sort of improve the water situation across the Southwest and even sort of the local soil moisture issues as well. And I just wanted to show you that some of the spectacular precip amounts that happened. This was just last week, so it wasn't totally, it was the 19th to the 21st. So Yuma just got hammered with some rain bands that kept continuing and continue. It was a very long duration event, but there were some estimates of precipitation totals just south of Yuma and northern Sonora of over 6 inches. So I can just imagine how much rain fell over that period and what the ground looks like. It's got to be pretty soggy in some of those areas. Okay, so let's look forward here and see what we're dealing with as far as some of the weather outlooks going forward. Okay, so I'm drawing right now the 8 to 14 day outlook that's produced by the Climate Prediction Center every day. And I think this is a pretty handy tool. It's basically taking the outer reaches of the daily weather model forecasts and taking all of the ensemble, so many weather forecast runs, and then an analyst is actually sort of studying them and then makes an assessment of whether or not conditions are going to be below average or above average temperature wise, which is that upper plot, or drier than average or wetter than average. And so you can see that looking out, this is February 3rd through February 9th. So we're looking out past next week. You can start to see there's a really strong confidence that we're going to get into a fairly cold pattern or below average pattern temperature wise here for the Southwest. And so that dark blue is indicating a pretty strong probability that the average temperatures over that period will be below average for this 8 to 14 day outlook. And if you look at the lower right here, it's we're definitely in a wetter pattern for the whole US, but you're starting to see we're right on the breakpoint line between a dry pattern for the California, even from the Pacific Northwest through Southern California. It's kind of the West Coast pattern, and Arizona is right in this breakpoint where it's called neutral or normal. And that's basically an indication that it's not clear if we're going to break one way or the other sort of a lower confidence, because I think we're really going to be in between the storm tracks to the east and this dry pattern to the west. And the weather map that, let's see if I can get it to come up here, is basically the analyst is looking at this weather map, and it's got there's a lot of information on this, but those green lines that you can see are the wave pattern or the mid-level flow in the atmosphere. And basically what we're looking at right here is that there's going to be a cold trough of low pressure through the middle part of the country. And so we're going to be in this dry, cool northwest flow out in the next couple of weeks. So there could be a storm event that drops down in that gives us some precipitation, but largely this is typically a cool, dry pattern looking out for the next 2 weeks or so. Even though we do have a precip event, probably is going to come through the region on Friday, and there is one out in the outlook later next week, but the uncertainty is quite high, which is why I think we're in between the dry and the wet here. So we could end up having some more precip over the next 2 weeks, but it does lean a little bit more. It's going to be sort of cool and dry. And then the week 3-4 outlook is another product produced by the Climate Prediction Center. And this is the very outer reaches of the weather models. And so it's typically a low skill, meaning it's not very accurate, but I think there's still some useful information in it that you can kind of glean from it. And what we're seeing here is the upper panel is showing sort of cool across the northern tier and warm across the eastern US, but it leaves the southwestern we call equal chances, meaning that there's really not a signal to grab onto to make a forecast. And it's the same as, which is interesting, looking at the lower panel here, which is precipitation. There's a dry signal in California and a dry signal in the southern tier, and Arizona again is in this middle ground where it's uncertain. This has actually been pretty accurate over the fall so far, and it typically shows us as dry. So, and it's really been latching onto this La Nina signal. So the fact that it is not showing a dry signal right now shows that there's some real weakness in our expectation for this La Nina signal through February. So again, that week the 8 to 14 day forecast is showing us kind of in the middle between it could be wet, it could be dry, and this forecast is even suggesting there's some uncertainty in that as well. So if you're looking for things to dry out, maybe in the next 4 weeks, we won't see that. We might see some intermittent precipitation sort of kind of come through, but I would expect that temperatures are going to be average to possibly below average, especially looking at that 8 to 14 day forecast. So it doesn't look like a slam dunk, going to be warm, going to be dry for the next 4 weeks. And we have La Nina in the background, which really I think is complicating these forecasts, because La Nina really in the historical analogs and what we typically see, really in February and March, we would expect to see warm and dry conditions. So I think there's some tussling between weather occurring across the Pacific and this La Nina signal. But what we expect to see with La Nina is expected to quickly dissipate in the March, April, May season. And by April, May, June, the most probable outcome is neutral conditions. So by the summer, we would expect us to be back into neutral, which I think could be favorable and not messing with our monsoon season coming up next summer. So again, like I said, typically what we see with La Nina springs is this forecast, this is the forecast for February, March, April. And I think this really leans further out in the outlook period, especially March and April, would be the expectation that warmer than average conditions return, drier than average conditions return. So that lingering La Nina signal really makes, especially that March and April period, the expectation would be that it's probably going to be dry and it's probably going to be warmer than average. Okay, and so just sort of thinking about some of the water situation across the basin here too. I pulled this up from the Colorado River Basin Forecast Center, and this is through January 27th, and this is the snow tell sites. And I was just kind of poking around to see what the storm did as far as increasing snowpack. It was miserable across much of the basin just a couple of days ago. And you can see Arizona has actually popped way up, especially across the Mogollon Rim, especially around Flagstaff. The snow tell sites are now close to average, if not above average. But much of the rest of the basin is still very much below average as far as snow accumulation, even with this snowstorm. We're gonna have to see the data kind of come in over the next couple of days. But again, I think most of the benefit really came to the lower part of the basin and some of the Colorado the Arizona watersheds. We got more snow than the upper basin did. And right now, the Lake Powell inflow, stream flow outlook, and this is from January 1st, so it's going to need to get updated again February 1st with some of the new snow data, but right now is a very miserable 53% of normal. And I pulled this from the Western Water Assessment, which is up at Colorado, University of Colorado. This was sort of a take from their last month's briefing. So January 1st, snow water equivalent was below normal for much of the region, especially in Utah. We still see that. As a result, early season forecasts of spring runoff volume are below normal to much below normal for the entire region except northern Wyoming. The seasonal runoff forecast for Lake Powell inflow is only 53% of normal. So we're going to have to just sort of watch that. And this one event probably won't change that much. And especially we had very dry soils later in the fall. So any of this snowpack is going to melt into recharging soil moisture before it turns into stream flow. So we really do need many more of these events to sort of reverse this stream flow situation. Okay, so just to wrap it up here, my kind of closing points are this La Nina is really been in control for much of the fall, and I'm really pleased that this storm event was able to sneak in during this La Nina event because I was concerned that we wouldn't see anything like this. But it has been our kind of main determinant of weather across the region. And it has led to these warm and relatively dry conditions up until last week. We've also seen in those dry conditions, low relative humidity has also led to strong diurnal temp variations. You see that in some of the station data is that we've had very warm days, but also very cool nights, sort of keeping an eye on those really low lying areas. The recent precip will definitely be helpful for short-term drought, but we're still in it as far as much longer term drought, as far as water situation, and even sort of soil moisture situation. We're going to need some more of these events through the spring. And the recent wet conditions probably won't continue. So I hope we can squeeze out a couple more in February, but this La Nina pattern typically does dry out March and April. So it'll be a surprise if March and April do end up wetter than average. So we'll just have to kind of wait and see. All right, thanks very much, and I'm happy to field any questions you have in chat as well.